Hello, everyone. This is Jeremiah Roberts, one of the co-hosts here at Cultish. I want to give you a heartfelt thanks for those of you who have generously given and supported our ministry the last few months. It's been very, very helpful. We do, however, need additional support as we head into 2025. Currently, we are operating roughly around 35 to 40% of what we need to operate on a monthly basis. So if you've been blessed by our content that we've been able to release to you, we'd ask that you would prayerfully consider partnering with us and be part of the mission to impact and change lives. Go to thecultistshow.com. There is a donate tab. You can donate one time. You can become a monthly supporter. All that goes directly towards helping us create more content. It'll allow Andrew to support his family as he is also a pastor up in Utah. And it would allow us to continue this important mission to engage the kingdom of the cults. So all that being said, enjoy this next podcast. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to part two. Welcome back to Cultish. We are talking about the Kabbalah, aka Jewish mysticism. Really enjoyed part one. Again, if you're listening in, this is part two of our conversation. So if you go back and listen to part one, it'll probably be very helpful for giving you a good foundation. Again, I really enjoyed the very beginning of the last episode. We are back with Brian Crawford. Good to have you back, man.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome, and appreciate you sharing everything with us. Also back with Will Spencer. You've been in Cultish multiple times. Good to have you back, man.
Always a pleasure.
All right, so we are going to be just jumping in helms deep into the Kabbalah, understanding the. I'm a Lord of the Rings nerd, a little Tolkien nerd, so that's some of my abbreviations I use. So again, tell everyone about the book. Again, if someone's listening for the first time, we have it in the show notes. It's very in depth, really scholarly. Really enjoyed the book. Tell us about the book again.
Yeah, so I wrote a book just recently called The Scandal of a Divine Messiah. And the subtitle is A Response to Maimonidean and Kabbalistic Challenges to the Incarnation. And so half of the book is about Maimonides, the Jewish rationalist, and we are not really spending much time talking about him during this episode series, but we are talking about the second target of the book, which is the Kabbalistic worldview. And I have 3 chapters in my book that goes in depth into the Kabbalistic worldview. The first chapter just gives a broad overview of what the Kabbalistic worldview is, how they understand God and the world and the relationship between God and the world. And then I have 2 chapters of critique. But I don't critique the system in that first chapter. I try to give an academic, scholarly, depending on tons of Jewish sources, to portray accurately the system of Kabbalistic thought. And that's what I'm hoping we can do in this episode, is that I can just portray the Kabbalistic worldview from a theological and philosophical perspective, and then Will is going to be bringing in the more experiential side of Kabbalistic practice, which I have no experience in, nor do I want to have experience in it. But we're hoping to really give a full-orbed understanding of this worldview, but without really spending much time critiquing it. And we'll save that for part 3.
Awesome. Love it. So let's jump into it. So in the show notes, I'm going to try and pronounce this all correctly, and this is the zinger of the transition. So here we go. It says Kaballah is cholent with the Greek how do you say that? Trafe inside. Kaballah is the cholent with the Greek trafe inside. And it says that you're going to explain it.
Yes.
So, in parentheses.
Kabbalah is cholent with Greek trafe inside. Have you ever had cholent before?
No, I read that sentence. I'm like, that's going to make sense someday, I'm sure.
That's okay. So cholent is a traditional Ashkenazi Jewish stew that is made on Friday afternoon. And you throw in all kinds of different ingredients to the stew, and then you put it on a hot plate. And the hot plate is turned on before the Sabbath starts on Friday evening, before the sun goes down. And as long as you have the electricity flowing to the hot plate before the Sabbath starts, then you can keep the electricity going throughout the entire Sabbath, so that you can have a hot food during the Sabbath. You're not allowed to do light switches on the Sabbath because that's changing the state of creation. That's changing the state of electricity, which is, where do they get this? Moses says you shall not kindle a fire on the Sabbath. And so the rabbis about 100 years ago or more, they said, well, electricity follows the same principle, so we're not allowed to change the state of electricity on the Sabbath. So they put the cholent, which is a stew, on the hot plate, and then they eat it all throughout Saturday, the Shabbat, the Sabbath. Okay, so why am I saying that Kabbalah is cholent with Greek treif inside? Well, you need to know what treif is. Do you know what treif is?
No.
Okay.
I have had cholent. We just didn't call it that.
Okay. So treif is the Orthodox Jewish word for non-kosher food. Okay, so that would be bacon, anything pork, shellfish, anything in Leviticus that says you shall not eat these things. Okay, so the analogy that I'm bringing with this, again, Kabbalah is cholent with Greek treif inside, is that Kabbalah is a mixture of all kinds of different worldview ingredients. It's all into one stew. And you could take a taste of that stew and you could say, this tastes so good. The experience that I am having of this stew is otherworldly. I am feeling things I've never felt before. I'm feeling a connection with the taste in a way that I've never felt before, because Kabbalah is very much about experience.
Yep.
Okay? But what if you are experiencing the good taste of non-kosher food that you're not supposed to be eating? So Kabbalah is, in my view, and we can walk through this as we go through this episode, Kabbalah is a mixture of a whole bunch of Greek mystical ingredients that came about before the New Testament era and after the New Testament era, but it's Greek, and it's Greek mysticism that was believed in and practiced by pagan Gentile Greeks, and then it was brought into Judaism. It was given a bris, it was given a circumcision, so to speak, brought into Judaism. Then rabbis started teaching it, and it became Jewish mysticism. But that's not what it originally was. It came from the outside. It did not come from Scripture. It did not come from the Torah. It came from pagan Greeks. Now, on one hand, you can't make an argument against something just by where it came from. That's called the genetic fallacy. Okay? Oh, I don't believe this because Hitler believed this. Well, Hitler also believed that the sky was blue on a clear sunny day. So just because Hitler believed it doesn't make it false. You also need to make an argument against the belief itself. And so I don't want to just do guilt by association and say Kabbalah is wrong because Greek mysticism is wrong. We also need to go into the actual doctrinal worldview beliefs themselves. But again, let's try to do that in episode 3. In this episode, I just want to explain what those doctrinal positions are, what makes the stew of Kabbalah, and then draw some connections with some of those ingredients that came before.
Will, do you have any thoughts on his description of the stew? Do you have any thoughts on the stew?
Yeah, I mean, reading the book, it was so interesting to see I'm sure we'll get into the precise terminology, the Neoplatonist ideas that had worked their way into the Kabbalah that I studied. So I didn't take an academic approach to learning Kabbalah. I took a more experiential, magical approach, meaning these aren't just ideas to be enjoyed, or studied, to write a paper on it. These are ideas to be learned, embodied, mastered, to manifest your will in the world. That was the kind of study that I did. So I was exposed to the Kabbalah not just as a worldview, but as something that I could use in my own life. And so again, much more utilitarian, much more experiential, much more mystical in terms of my actual experience. And so the Kabbalah that I studied had overlaps with Western esotericism, mysticism, and the occult, which I don't know what the origins of those are precisely. It's just magic, essentially. But I definitely encounter the Kabbalistic worldview, and I can see from your descriptions, like, yeah, this doesn't seem like it would come from Judaism at all. There's no basis for any of this in the Hebrew scriptures, right? Like all is one, or all is emanations from the divine. That's not what Genesis says. That's not what Genesis 1:1 says. So I was able to identify those ideas and then later come back to them and say, that doesn't seem Jewish to me. And so to read that these are Greek ideas that had woven their way into a Jewish stew, but we did have cholent, but my mom called it garbage stew. So
I love it.
she was very creative.
That's a very reformed Jewish term for it.
And
yes.
we didn't keep kosher, we didn't keep
Right.
the Sabbath, but yeah, that was the name for it. But to see that these ideas, these essentially Greek ideas, pagan ideas, had woven their way into Jewish mysticism makes a lot of sense, because that's the Kabbalah that I experienced, was this Jewish mysticism, Greek mysticism with magical Western occultism in a big mash.
Andrew, what questions would you have as we begin to just the first steps to unraveling this the Kabbalah or the stew?
Right. So to think about it, could you first describe what would be clean in terms of religion, and then go into the unkosher part for Judaism real quick? Just so we have that basic foundation of what is like what the Bible would teach essentially for clean Judaism versus unclean.
Well, that's an interesting question that gets into what is the Judaism that God wants Jewish people to practice. That seems to be your question, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that would be the Judaism of the apostles.
Okay.
They were Jews who believed that the Messiah had come. They lived Jewish lives. They continued circumcising their sons. They continued praying at the temple. They continued celebrating the festivals. You see this all throughout the New Testament, that they were Jews who practiced a fulfilled Judaism. And so there's a lot of good things that I believe that Jewish people who believe in Jesus today can and probably should practice, because it connects them with their heritage and their background. You know, I'm all in favor of Jewish believers in Jesus, keeping some of the festivals on the Levitical calendar of Leviticus 23 as it has been fulfilled in Messiah. So celebrate Passover and talk about how Jesus is the fulfillment of the broken bread, and he is the one who is the fulfillment of the 4 cups of wine. He shed his blood. That's what communion is. It's a fulfilled Passover celebration. And what about the other festivals? That would be a fulfilled New Testament form of Judaism that I believe the apostles practiced, and that should be a good model for Jewish believers in Jesus to practice today. And that's what Messianic Jews today are doing, and saying, hey, the Judaism that we think is way over here and the Christianity that's way over here, there actually is a middle ground. The apostles actually show a Messiah-centered Judaism that is fulfilled in the Messiah. And so that would be the clean Judaism that I would encourage Jewish people to think about.
Let me button up the question a little bit too. Like, what are the fundamental presuppositions of Judaism versus what Kabbalah would be, so we can compare the two, like monotheism, the nature of God,
Sure,
versus Kabbalah.
So the key place that you could go to try to get the key foundational principles of Judaism today is Maimonides' 13 Principles. He wrote those in the 1100s, and I have here a Siddur, a Jewish prayer book, and this is prayed every single day by Orthodox Jewish men in synagogue, sometimes for 45 minutes at a time. They do it 3 times a day, and every single morning they recite Maimonides' 13 Principles, okay, every single day. So that would be as if, we were to wake up in the morning and we would recite the Nicene Creed, and then we would do it 3 hours later, and then we would do it 6 hours later, okay? So they are very, very devoted to what they believe, and Maimonides' 13 Principles is the foundation, and he starts off with God is a creator. He says that God, the second one is that God is a singularity. Not just that he's one, but that he's a singularity. We'll get into what he means by that, because that influenced Kabbalah, that God is unknowable. You can't define him. It's called negative theology. And so that's principle 2. Principle 3 is that God does not have a body. And then it goes on from there. So those are the non-negotiable principles in Judaism today. Those were not the non-negotiable principles of Judaism in Jesus' time. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's shifted, it's changed. Maimonides was doing apologetics against Christianity and against Islam,
right,
when he was formulating his 13 principles. And so we can't just say this came from on high at Mount Sinai to Moses. No, that's not the case. But those are some of the ground principles. But here's the problem. And we're going to get into this throughout our conversation. Kabbalah is all about two levels of interpretation. You've got the basic level of interpretation, which is grammar, syntax, regular language, something that even we Gentiles can understand. Okay? That's the basic level. But then there is the mystical, the allegorical, the secret understanding that only mystical Jews understand. And so while they would say God is one, they have a mystical understanding of what that actually means. And so it's hard to actually pin them down on these are the key foundational principles because it's very fluid.
And that replicates itself across mystical traditions, that there's the level of understanding that you have, and then there's a level of obscurantism where they try and hide the meaning, and only the truly elite and elect can penetrate through to the actual truth, and they have ways of communicating with each other that I know the secret insider thing, but those other guys don't. And there are grades of understanding that you pass through. It becomes an elite club, an inner ring kind of problem.
I'd love to share two quick stories. I'm a new missionary to the Jewish people in seminary in Brooklyn. I'm talking with Orthodox Jewish people out on the street, and I'm sharing Isaiah 53 with them. And we put up a table, and we put Isaiah 53 in Hebrew and in English and in Russian because there were a lot of Russian Jews in the area. And I would try to start up conversations with them. And the Orthodox Jewish people, at first, they would say, oh, well, here's Isaiah 53. Okay, I'll read it. But do you know Hebrew? And I was right at the beginning of my seminary career, and I'm a Gentile, and I would have to admit, no, I don't know Hebrew. I'm sorry. And then they would say, well, then it's not worth time speaking with you because you can't possibly know what this means because is that translation that you have in English on your table there? Who is that translated by? Oh, Christians? Oh, then that means that I don't trust their English translation that you're working from. You're going from the NIV, the ESV, the NASB. I don't care. They were all by Christians. So why don't you go learn Hebrew, and then we can have a conversation again. And they weren't being, that wasn't an honest challenge. It was basically a way to cut off the conversation.
Yes.
So what did I do? Well, in seminary, I learned biblical Hebrew. Okay. So then I could get past that smoke screen of an objection. And they were not used to, a Gentile Christian like myself actually being able to say, okay, this is what this Hebrew word means. Let's look at the grammar. Then they would go to, well, but you don't have the secret knowledge. You don't have the esoteric understanding of this. And so I would try to exegete the scripture word by word in Hebrew with them. And because I'm being trained in grammatical historical exegesis at the Feinberg Center in Brooklyn, which is an extension campus of Talbot. And that's what I was taught to do. And so then I would ask them a yes or no question about this one Hebrew word. And do you think that they answered with a yes or no answer?
Nope.
No. They would answer with a story. They would not answer a direct question. And I got so frustrated because I'm this former engineer who is so about categories and yes and no definitions and answers. I asked you a yes or no question. There's no middle ground. Just say yes or no. And they wouldn't do it. And we were just arguing past each other. And that was before I had done the studies for this book. I was just totally ill-equipped to deal with a more esoteric understanding of Scripture. And that's where we as evangelical Protestants, we're so sola scriptura. This is what the Word says. We're at a real disadvantage because they are not just going by what the grammatical, historical, textual Hebrew means.
And he's trying to communicate through the story. He's trying to communicate to you in a symbolic language that you're just not. It went
totally past me. I was totally oblivious to what he was trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. He's operating on levels that he's trying to reach out in a particular language, and that maybe coded isn't the right word, but a particular way. And it's like, what do these words mean? What are we even talking about right now?
He's looking at me saying, who are you Gentile Christian who are so rigid in your yes and no categories?
Yeah.
And he's trying with his story to break me of that rigid understanding, and it just didn't work for me, and my arguments didn't work on him, and I was just frustrated, and I told myself, I'm never going to understand these people.
Yeah.
And then that gets back to what I ended the last episode with. I needed to realize that my frustration was turning to bitterness. And at one point, the Lord convicted me, Brian, you are not loving these people. You're getting more angry and frustrated, and you're just throwing your hands up and saying you can't understand these people. I thought you're called to reach these people with the gospel. Brian, you need to be praying that you would actually love these people and actually understand them.
Kind of like you had a Jonah chapter 4 moment.
I did.
Yeah.
This book is an extended repentance from that frustration and that bitterness
Wow.
that I experienced out on the streets of Brooklyn.
Yeah, and it just maybe just a compliment off of that is, or comment is that, just watching the one video where you're dialoguing with those two Jewish men, you could see that in the process of you answering their questions and having that dialogue, there was a genuine care and like love for those two men. That was like my biggest takeaway from that whole video. So I really appreciate that. So jumping into Kabbalah, what's really interesting is that a lot of the stuff that Andrew, you and I have covered has really kind of been around the 18th century. That's when a lot of cults arrived in the United States. So there is something that is interesting because a lot of what you're dealing with, the origins of the Kabbalah, you're talking around, the mid 1500s or so.
Actually, earlier than that.
Earlier than that, yes.
Yes, there's been different stages of Kabbalistic thought. There was even Jewish mysticism before the 1200s, but the 1200s, and with the publication of the Zohar in medieval Spain, that's where Kabbalah really comes into its own. But yeah, you'll have to read the book and the history to see the different stages.
Yeah, well, what was really interesting is that, you mentioned is the Kabbalistic theosophy. And when I hear theosophy, my immediate association is Helena Blavatsky, who was a Russian occultist in the 18th century. But this is something that's a lot earlier. So maybe could you just start to unravel that? Because this really has to do with the underlining worldview of Kabbalah. Can you bring us into that?
So at the beginning of my 3 chapters on Kabbalah in my book, I start with 2 head quotes that I think really encapsulate the way that Kabbalistic theosophy or theology works. This first one is by Rabbi Zalman of Liadi. He was the founder of Chabad mysticism. Chabad is known worldwide for having their Chabad houses. They basically send out Jewish missionaries into areas that have populations of secular Jewish people, and they try to bring them into ultra-Orthodox Chabad mysticism. And so he was writing in the 1700s, and he says, while you see yourself as apart from God, God sees you as a part of God. Interesting play on words. We have our perception. We think, oh, I'm not God. I'm just a finite human being. But God, with his omniscient, all-knowing perspective on what's really true, he overrules our self-perception, and we really are in him. We are a part of God. And so this trains Kabbalists to not trust what their perception is. Don't trust your senses. Don't trust your rational thought, because there is a deeper thought, a deeper mystery that is behind the scenes that you need to give yourself over to. Okay? And then the second quote, this is from the Zohar, which I already mentioned. It was published in around the 1260s, 1270s. It claims to be by a rabbi from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, but scholars don't believe that is true. But the Zohar talks about the idea of who God is, and it defines God as Ein Sof. Ein Sof, which in Hebrew means that which has no end. Or in other words, the infinite. Okay, so Ein Sof is the infinite, and it's the highest understanding of what God is. Pondering the infinite is the gateway to mysticism of any kind. Okay, you spend more time thinking about the infinite, and you are going to end up in some kind of mysticism. Okay, so Ein Sof, from the Zohar here, Ein Sof does not abide being known, does not produce end or beginning. Primordial nothingness engendered beginning and end. No desires, no lights, no sparks in that infinity. All these lights and sparks are dependent on it, but cannot comprehend. Now, that may sound like gobbledygook to you guys, okay? But basically what he's saying here is that the infinite is so far beyond knowledge, so far beyond rational thought, that it initiates reality, but doesn't initiate reality. It creates a beginning, but it doesn't create a beginning. It produces sparks, but it doesn't produce sparks. you can't actually know what it is or what it does, while at the same time, we are trying to put into words what it is and what it does. It's this self-contradiction, and they know that it's a contradiction. But that's what makes it mysticism.
Will, I see the wheels in your head turning. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, like Buddha said essentially the same thing, that the ultimate is unknowable. That when asked about God, this was, I think it's the Lotus Sutra or something, when asked about God, he just held up a lotus and was silent, right? This idea that the ultimate nature of everything is just beyond comprehension, and to understand the infinite is a process of evacuating your understanding of everything else, of non-learning, of unlearning, of unwinding your consciousness, of transcending these limited perceptions of categories and separate things that we can't comprehend it at this level of reality. And so hearing those quotes, I've never read the Zohar. Again, I've experienced all of this through tarot and stuff like that. But hearing that is like, yeah, that's just Eastern and Western mysticism. It's just mysticism no matter which direction you look at it. And so to hear those specific quotes and to see it, this is why I was so attracted to this, as I was already, from growing up or from coming of age in Northern California, which is so saturated with Eastern mysticism, Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism specifically. Once I encountered its Western version, it all made perfect sense. Like, oh, there's something much deeper here. It's not just trying to figure out the truth in the East. There's a Western expression of it as well. And that was actually the teaching of the mystery school. Mystery school, in one of the earliest lessons, said that the truth has an Eastern and a Western manifestation. The Eastern manifestation uses its own set of symbols, like the lotus flower is a good example for this progressive unfolding. But the symbol of the lotus flower has no meaning to Western minds because we don't have lotuses. There's a specific set of symbols that are geared for Western minds, but those symbols have been oppressed, they've been occulted, they've been hidden, and now you can just study these occulted Western symbols and tap into a deeper tradition that is universal in a sense. So as you're reading that, it's like, oh yeah, you've been telling my story the whole day. So
yeah. Love it.
Andrew, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, when I'm thinking about those quotes, it almost sounds like it's supposed to put inside someone a fundamental distrust of what they see with their eyes.
Oh, it's so true.
Yes.
So true. What great. That is the essence of mysticism in general, but definitely the gnostic kind of mysticism, where you are supposed to rebel against the cosmos. Like rebel against your perception of the cosmos, because everything that you see, feel, hear, experience, know, it's all deception. And so you have to distrust everything that you've been told up to this point.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what it sounds like.
Well, that's what mysticism is that this reality, this earth, this life, all of it is illusion, right? Whether you call it samsara or whatever, right? None of it can be real. None of it is essential reality. It has no essence in itself. You have to penetrate through that to the deeper reality that transcends everything. And so, yes, it's deeply anti-human. It's deeply nihilistic. You negate the self, which is why when I went to India, one of the things that I saw was people in ashrams desperately trying to unwind their own consciousnesses, trying to escape their own very existence in order to penetrate through to reality. They wanted reality so bad, they were willing to essentially destroy themselves to get there. And that's the point, and that's why all this stuff is satanic in nature. It's not affirming the goodness of reality. God calls creation very good. It doesn't provide a pathway for redemption for the self, for the existence of an immortal soul. You don't exist at all. None of this exists. None of your relationships, none of it is real. And so it causes people to try and destroy themselves to get at a deeper truth that isn't ultimately there, that they can never achieve.
Yeah. Now, this is interesting just because of the fact that, while, again, you're the most versed person in here when it comes to Kabbalah, and you from an experiential standpoint, is that while I'm not the biggest expert, there's a lot of similar language, again, knowing my understanding of just, and Andrew, you can relate to this too, just when it comes to like Gnosticism, occultism, oneism, pantheism, panentheism, like I understand that language, so I'm picking up on the intertwining of that within Judaism, which is super fascinating. Maybe we could talk about some of the parallels, because I think part of what's articulated or argued in Kabbalah is that these things are the mystical Judaism that is part of what this goes all the way back to Moses. That's what's argued.
That's what's argued.
But in fact, it's actually related to maybe three different categories: Gnostic, Neoplatonist, and Pythagorean
Got it.
parallels in it, which is that related to the Pythagorean theorem? The mathematician?
So
or?
Pythagoras
Yes.
was a mathematician, but also a mystic.
Yes.
And yes,
Okay.
he did the Pythagorean theorem, but he's also kind of the father of Greek mysticism.
Okay, because
Yes.
I was when I was reading the notes, I was getting flashbacks from a high school math class. I had so
Yeah.
let's get into that.
So I think to understand the parallels, we first need to understand how the Kabbalists view reality and how reality works. And in my book, I have several diagrams, and up here on these 2 pages, I've got what I call the Kabbalistic cosmology, how they view the cosmos, how they view how reality, how the universe came to be. And this is really important to understand, I think, before we can really get into the Greek parallels. And so I think it would be good to just start from the top and work our way down, okay? So we already talked about Ein Sof, the infinite, okay? Can't call him a he, because he assigns some kind of personhood or a gender or something to it.
It's a limitation.
It's a limitation, exactly. So Ein Sof can't even be said to exist, because then you are saying that it exists, that you're making a positive claim that it exists. So they would say Ein Sof is beyond existence, just like Ein Sof is beyond everything, okay? So Ein Sof, for one reason or another, it decides to, can't even say the word create, but decides to emanate something within itself, okay? But there's a problem, because the infinite in Kabbalistic thought is the infinity of infinities. It's like you take infinity, and then in math, you put it to the power of infinity, and then you put that to the power of infinity and the power of infinity. This is actually called transfinite mathematics. You could look up George Cantor if you really want to go nerdy on this kind of stuff, okay? It's the idea that everything that exists, whether physically or even in your mind, takes up some kind of space, okay? So if it's in your mind, it doesn't take up physical space. It takes up mental space, okay? So the idea of truth takes up some space. The idea of postmodernism takes up some space. Just like these books on the table, they take up physical space, okay? And the infinity of Ein Sof is so infinite that its infinity covers all possibilities for anything to exist. Nothing can exist, whether physically or intellectually, metaphysically, spiritually. Nothing can exist because Ein Sof fills up all the space, metaphorically. Okay? So in order for Ein Sof to actually emanate something else, it has to contract its infinity. It has to take, let's just envision it as ones and zeros, like digital code, okay? Everything is filled with ones and zeros, okay? It has to contract a space within itself, remove those ones and zeros so that something else can be placed in its space. But here's the thing. They don't want to say that the infinite ceased being infinite. So they'll say, it contracted itself metaphorically. Didn't actually take out those ones and zeros from that space. It's just all a metaphor, okay? So then it carves out this space within itself, and then it shoots a light, a metaphorical light, into that space. And this metaphorical light then traces out a bunch of spheres. And then the light, after it traces out a sphere, it goes deeper into this void. And it traces out another sphere, and another sphere, and another sphere, until there are 10 spheres that are all in themselves as an onion, okay? But there's a problem, because some of the lower spheres, here's the thing, they believe that the further you get away from the purity of the infinity, the more evil it is, and the less pure it is. So the spheres in the middle, they're the lowest in this scheme. They're not as strong as the spheres on the outside. So the lower spheres can't handle the light coming from Ein Sof, so they shatter. And this shattering is a catastrophe. They say it's an absolute catastrophe. And then these spheres, which are all called by names of God's attributes. So you've got the crown, you've got wisdom, you've got understanding, you've got knowledge, power, all in Hebrew, of course. Mm-hmm. These spheres shatter, some of those spheres shatter, and their waste parts from their shattering fall deeper and deeper and deeper down until those waste parts turn into physical matter. Okay? And that physical matter is evil because it's the lowest part of this process. And the last sphere, which is Yesod, it speaks words into those fallen pieces, and the physical universe emerges in its forms. Okay, so we know in Genesis 1, God spoke, and it happened. Okay, the first thing was light. They love how the first one was light because light is the center of this whole emanation process. But then all those words that God speaks in Genesis 1, they say that this lowest sphere is speaking, and it turns the physical world into what it is today. But it's the lowest, evilest part of creation. You can't call it creation. It's all emanating. And all of this is continually emanating from God. And they would say that all of the light that is coming down into our world and it's being instantiated or turned into physical things, they're actually Hebrew letters that God is continuously speaking, okay? Because God is speaking the world into existence continuously, okay? And they're actual Hebrew letters with words, and these words have meaning, and so you and I exist by virtue of Hebrew words infusing us. That's why we exist, okay? And they're falling down from the heavens continuously. And then after those 10 spheres shatter, I remember they were like a concentric, like an onion. Then they reconfigure themselves into a different shape here, which is the most common diagram that is associated with Kabbalistic thought. It's these three tiers. Yeah, go ahead and hold up yours. That's probably easier to see than one.
Kabbalistic tree of life.
It's the tree of life.
Yeah, we'll pull up images anyways.
Yeah. So it's got three columns, but these are the 10 potencies of God that some of them shattered, but now they are in a different relationship with each other, and they all interpenetrate each other, such that God's wisdom interpenetrates with his might, and his might interpenetrates with his knowledge, and his knowledge penetrates with his thought. And all of this is this pulsating system of God's attributes that are all then patterned down on earth. And this is where you get the idea of as above, so below. Everything that is on that Kabbalistic tree of life, that's in the human psyche as well. That's patterned in the world itself. And so if you want to have insight into yourself, then you need to study the sphirot, the spheres that are up above. Once you have insight in the spheres that you can't see, they're on a different level of reality. Once you have insight in how wisdom works with thought and how it works with knowledge and how it works with the kingship and how it works with all these things, then you have psychological insight into how we work as human beings.
Wow.
And I could just keep going on, but this is how they view the world, that we are one with God, we are in God, we are emanations from God, continuously streamed from God's light through Hebrew letters, and by studying this theology, we can have insight into who we are, and we can unlock the hidden potential that is within our own psyche, because as below, so above.
Will.
Yeah,
Give me your thoughts.
I mean, what you are describing is exactly what I learned experientially, like piece for piece, including the psychological aspect, that to know oneself, to know one's own mind is in a sense to know God. And then because God is creative, we are creative, and therefore we can put these principles into practice to manifest our creative will here on earth. And that's the magical component. So it's really interesting because I think I said earlier that the way that I learned Kabbalah was through symbols, was through tarot, which are essentially symbol matrices. So it's not reading it from a textbook and studying it that way. It's learning it experientially through the eyes and through the use of symbols. So you talked about the Ein Sof descending and creating space for itself to go into. So this is the first tarot card. This is of the mystery school that I was a part of, and you see in here a couple different things. You see the sun up here, which represents the essential light, but then you see this figure who's about to fall off a cliff, right? And so the Fool is descending, has created space that it descends into, has created a space for it to emanate itself into, and this figure is covered with various symbols that represent its essential divinity and its combination of opposites. And so as you're describing this first step that the Ein Sof is taking to descend into material reality, that's depicted in this card. And it's depicted, this is obviously the 0, right, is the number. And then, of course, you have the Aleph, and the letter has all kinds of different symbolism to it. So this entire symbol matrix describes exactly what you're saying. And so ultimately it does show up in this system was meant to teach adherents or adepts psychological knowledge, practical knowledge, worldview knowledge, all of these different things all at once. And so
can you hold that up again? So Ein Sof is being associated with the number 0 because there's nothing that you can know about it. It is beyond positive knowledge. So it's a 0. Remember in that head quote, it said primordial nothingness has engendered all of creation. That's symbolized by the 0. But then also you've got the Aleph, which is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Does anybody know what the sound of Aleph is in the Hebrew language?
I do.
What is it?
There's not a sound.
There's
really.
not a sound.
Yeah.
So they take the syllables for the letters to have metaphysical meaning. Yeah. And just like you cannot pronounce the Aleph, so too you cannot say anything about Ein Sof. And one last thing, I do want to correct what I said in the last time. The last sphera, the last one of the 10 sphirot that actually emanates the world is actually Malchut, not Yesod, as if that really matters to all of us.
I have a question.
Yes.
In terms of like language in and of itself, do they believe that the Hebrew was delivered to Moses through like actual stone? What do they, if that is the belief, I don't know if that is or not, but what do they do with like recent findings of like Proto-Hebrew and stuff like that? And why not use Proto-Hebrew instead of
language? The Hebrew is the language of God. It's the language of angels. It's the language of Adam and Eve. It's the language of everybody in their view. So Hebrew has a mystical, essential component to it that no other language has in their view.
Yes.
Okay? And that's a real problem because we're going to get into some of the parallels with the Greek mystery schools. But these ideas of having a secret language that has infused within it special meanings that are unique to only that language, that started with Greek. Okay? The Greek mystics, they mysticize the Greek language, which has different syllables for the letters, has a different number of letters than Hebrew, so the math doesn't line up, the syllables don't line up. But anyways, what do they do with, say, discoveries of Proto-Hebrew and whatnot? Kabbalists and ultra-Orthodox Jews in general, they care about the past, but they care about the past as it has been delivered to them as their heritage through their trusted leaders.
Tradition.
Okay? It's their tradition.
Yeah.
So it's heritage rather than history. So they don't pass on anything that has not been passed on from their own sages. Okay? So who cares that some some archaeologist has found some Proto-Hebrew with a different way of doing the Hebrew lettering, or that pronunciations of Hebrew maybe were different back then as they are now. Who cares? Because we don't care about outside knowledge. We care about what has been passed on in our tradition.
Through inspiration of what is the word for infant? Ansof?
Ein Sof.
Ein Sof. We use what has been passed down.
Correct. Yeah. And so I've actually heard some Orthodox Jewish people say to me, we Jews don't care about archaeology. Now, that's not the case for definitely not modern Orthodox Jews, okay? So like the Ben Shapiros of the world, they care about scholarship.
He loves those facts.
Yeah, they love those facts, and the facts don't care about your feelings, right? Yeah. So
say that 10 times.
Again, the Jewish community is not monolithic, but there are aspects of the Jewish community they don't care about archaeology, they don't care about the latest scholarship, they don't care about what scholars are publishing in papers, they don't care about what's being taught by Christians or even secular Jews. They just don't care, because that's not what has been passed down by their sages in their tradition.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because when I think of Judaism, when I think of just the history of Israel and like biblical history, it seems to be, it's just a very evidential worldview. Like, I think of all the things when you think of someone who's a historic Jew or somebody who is in like Israel, you think of like the Wailing Wall, you think of the garbage that they're wearing. Like, there's so many things. It's so interesting hearing your perspective, where instead of these things that are evidential, it's all super esoteric and very otherworldly. Like, there's an emphasis on the otherworldly, which is very similar to the Gnostics, where there's an emphasis on the spiritual and the physical is bad. With that being said, when it comes to Kabbalah, like, what's their view on the body? Because when you look at traditional historic Gnosticism, they had a view that the flesh was bad and that the spirit was good, and that really your body was sort of in a prison that was trapping your spirit within it. How does that work? Because in your book, and you're talking about the incarnation, which is a stumbling block for them. How does that work within the Kabbalah?
Yeah, great question. This is where the Platonic background of Kabbalah really shows itself very strongly. And Gnostic thought is Platonism gone wild, according to some scholars that will actually say that's the best way to understand Gnostic thought, when it's also mixed in with Christian and Jewish ideas. So Gnosticism is this mishmash, but it is squarely in the Platonic tradition, saying that physicality is the lowest and the worst and the most evil of all things that exist, and that we are trapped in a body, that our body misleads us to truth and reality. This is where you get the Plato's allegory of the cave. I mean, have you guys ever talked about the allegory of the cave on the podcast before? Should I explain that?
Maybe go through it though. It's a good.
Okay, it is so important for answering this question. Okay, so Plato, he has this famous story called the allegory of the cave, which it is an allegory, but it's supposed to teach, like a parable, some deeper truth about reality. So basically paraphrasing it, there are a bunch of prisoners who are in a cave. They were born in the cave, so they have no experience of anything outside of the cave. The cave is very dark, and they're chained to a rock wall, and the rock wall is about yay high, waist high behind them, and they are forced to look at the cave wall in front of them. They're not allowed to look anywhere else. They just have to look straight forward. But there is a torch that is behind the low wall, and there are men who are walking in between that wall and the torch, and thereby their shadows are being projected on the wall in front of the men. And so they see a cave wall, but they see shadows and figures going in front of them. And that is their entire reality. They don't know anything about what is producing those figures. They don't know about the human form and how it's three-dimensional. They don't know anything. All they see are shadows on the wall, okay? So Plato paints this scene, and he says, what would happen if someone were to free one of those men and allow him not only to see what was going on behind him in the cave, but also would be able to go outside of the cave and experience sunlight and trees and the wind on his face, like the experience of a completely different reality. And he says, wouldn't he never want to go back to that cave unless he wanted to go back and to free others? Okay, he uses that as an analogy to explain the human condition, that we are like prisoners trapped in that cave. All we see are shadows on the wall. We have no understanding of true reality. The shadows have some kind of reality. They really do exist. But the shadows are a derived reality. They're a lesser reality than the men who are actually projecting those shadows. And the cave itself is a lesser reality than the world outside. So what Plato uses this analogy to explain is that there are tiers to reality. Okay? There's the reality that we understand and that we exist in, and with our own eyes we can understand, but that's the lowest and the worst part of reality. And we need to train ourselves that everything that we see, everything that we understand, they're just mere shadows on the wall, and that we need to seek enlightenment to escape the cave, and so that we can know what the truth is outside. That is Platonism. That is Gnosticism. And that is Kabbalistic thought. They believe that this world, we are trapped in a cave, and only they have the secret knowledge to get us free from the cave.
Does that sound like any movies you can think of?
Oh, man.
The Matrix.
Truman Show.
Yep.
The Truman Show, I love that.
Yeah.
My wife.
Those are Platonic allegories.
That's right.
So it reminds me of like the realm of ideals in a sense from Plato, because I think the argument he would make too is like in this world, you can't draw a perfect circle. No matter what, the closer you get to that line, as good as it looks, it can become little squares or messed up. But essentially, since you think of the circle, there must be a realm in which exists the perfect circle. We just can't replicate it. So it's like taking a philosophy, but then translating it into religion and thinking about the infinite being of God.
Right.
So would Kabbalah argue, in a sense, that there's through rites and rituals in which you can overcome aspects of the material world in order to know more of the infinite?
Yes, 100%. And Will would know about those practices far better than I do as an outsider.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's you can't, because it's like apophatic theology. It's always via negativa, not this, not this, not this. You can't study it. You can't read a book about these things. You have to experience it yourself. So whereas you have sort of Eastern style of meditation, which is about emptying the mind, like a Buddhist Vipassana retreat. So I did a 10-day Buddhist Vipassana retreat in Kashmir, 10 hours of silent retreat, 10 days, 10 hours of meditation a day for 10 days. We weren't sitting for 10 hours straight. It was like in 1 and 2 hour chunks, but
That's insane.
It was. So, but through what you do is you end up focusing your attention on a little like postage stamp size of your body, and you just run this kind of scanner over the body, and you just learn to do that over the course of 10 days. And then ultimately everything kind of dissolves and goes away, and you have a transcendent consciousness experience of the one. That's the intended goal of that. I discovered free will while doing that. Free will is not supposed to be there, they told me, but that's another conversation. So there are similar techniques in all Gnostic practices, and including in Kabbalah. So I would say that the Kabbalistic practices that I learned were about meditating on the cards, like looking at them in a particular series of patterns to understand this is one of them. This is the actual pattern that you're supposed to arrange the cards in, and these illustrate various principles of Kabbalah laid out in a matrix of, I believe it's 22 cards. And so this is the entire Kabbalah depicted in essentially comic book form. And by meditating on cards, pairs of cards, sequences of cards, you penetrate through experientially to the deeper understanding that you're talking about. And it's something that can't be communicated. Like I can't speak it to you. You have to have an inner experience. Like in the same way, if I asked you to describe yourself to me, describe your inner experience to me, you wouldn't even know where to begin. It's very similar to that. But you know intuitively that you've had that experience, and it changes a person. And that's why they say to you, well, have you had the experience? And you're like, no, I'm a critic. Well, you're just a critic. You don't understand. And so to have the inner experience your critiques are right. Let me just tell you that. But different Gnostic mystical practices, again, this is not just a Western phenomenon. It's not just a Jewish phenomenon. It's Plato, right? It's Advaita Vedanta Hinduism. It's Vipassana Buddhism, right? It's Western occultism. This is a global phenomenon, oneness theology that sets itself up in opposition to the triune God. That's what this is.
To me, it sounds like it even goes back to the Ptolemaic period when the Greeks took over parts of Egypt and they blended types of their theology. Because the phrase "as above, so below" comes from the Emerald Tablet, which is from the Corpus Hermeticum, which is pseudepigrapha, was supposed to be written by Hermes Trismegistus, which is a blending of Greek gods and Egyptian gods. So it's like, this is old stuff, man. This is old. It's like a recovering of ancient mystery religions.
Yeah. Well, the Emerald Tablet, the Hermes Trismegistus. Yeah.
You got it right there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing. This was part of the mystery school that I was a part of. They give me the Emerald Tablet. They give me the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. There's this thing called the Pattern on the Trestle Board, which I can read. There's the tarot cards, which use Western symbolism to communicate Gnostic concepts. There's the application of all these into magical techniques to manifest your will. I was 2 years into a 15-year-long program, and this was a daily practice for me, like every day for like an hour. And so when I became a Christian, I got very convicted. Like, Will, you used to study this stuff for an hour a day, and you can't read Scripture for an hour a day.
Wow.
It's like to think that is like, whoa, I need to spend some time. But yeah, it is a complete system. All the pieces fit together. They're very honest about the different schools that they bring together. There was overlapping with Hinduism at times.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing is you're not just looking down a tunnel at one particular mystical tradition that's unique to a place in time. You're actually looking, it's almost like tips of the iceberg, where you've got these little Gnostic peaks, but if you go beneath the surface of the water and you go down far enough, they all share the same body. And that's oneism.
The perennial tradition.
It's exactly right.
Sometimes called. And I wanted to bring up something that connects with what I explained before about the Hebrew letters that are falling from the sky, metaphorically, from Ein Sof up above, that they actually then coalesce into physical reality, which we would call creation. They would say that if you learn this system with these Hebrew letters and the combinations of the Hebrew letters, you learn the mystical names of God, and you learn how God's potencies and his attributes and his names all intertwine with each other. And maybe after you've finished your 15-year course, then you too can create like God creates.
That's right.
Because words have power. And God used words to emanate the whole universe. Therefore, if I want to manifest something in my life, then I use the secret incantations of the Hebrew letters to manifest whatever I want in my life. And so we're seeing this kind of stuff in the church with words of power and stuff, but this stuff goes way back.
Yeah, I'm hearing like a lot of modern like new thought.
Sure.
I've got, friends who are
It's
all
not
just
so
into
new.
this stuff. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What's also just interesting, and we were at coffee this morning, you were making a distinction between you as one who studies Kabbalah just in the sense of understanding the worldview implications and the primary sources, but not studying it in a mystical sense. There's a distinction between the two. And one of the commonalities I can just tell by the stuff you held up, there's a distinction between reading your book, Brian, versus looking at some of the things around there where it's like if you go there, and this is the commonality, while Kabbalah is distinct from all the different brands of neo-paganism, the one thing that isn't common when you go into those things and start meditating on those cards, this isn't just a mystical experience in the sense that you're just sort of hallucinating ahead in an extension of your own mind. You're tapping into true things that are otherworldly, and that's where the real danger of the occult comes. That's where the real danger of the occult comes in. And that's where the spiritually dangerous aspect of this comes in.
When I first started asking questions about Kabbalistic thought to my peers and to the more seasoned missionaries to the Jewish people, they were very cautionary and skeptical about why I was asking these kinds of questions, because Kabbalah is the realm of the demonic. It's the realm of Satan. We should not touch these things with a 10-foot pole. We should not study these things. And I heard what they were saying, and I thought to myself, well, that maybe that's true, but there are real people who believe these things. And I, with Chosen People Ministries, have a calling to reach those people. And if I want to be able to connect with them, I need to understand their worldview. So how can I study the things that they believe is true without opening up my soul to these powers? And that's where I said previously, I believe that we as believers, whether we're Messianic Jews, Jewish believers in Jesus, or Christians, we should study Kabbalah to learn about it and not from it. Because from it, you learn from it, that means you're putting yourself in a secondary position. You're looking up to it as a source of truth, as a source of true experience, that maybe this is some hidden mystical Jewish wisdom that the church has been blind to for all these centuries. And so I want the true knowledge that's been hidden from my eyes. No. That's learning from Kabbalah.
Right.
Yeah.
No. We need to learn about it, not just because we're curious, but we should be doing so for the purpose of actually sharing the good news of the truth with Jewish people. I don't sit around reading Kabbalistic books for fun just because I enjoy it. I read them because I love the Jewish people, and I believe that they have been carried away captive by this stuff.
Yeah.
And I want them to be freed from it, not from the cave. That's what they want freedom from the cave, Plato's cave. No, I don't think that's the right salvation that they need freedom from.
And I just want to be clear, I don't like having this stuff. Like again, we talked about burning the cards when you and I first met at Apologia Man Camp. And so you and I have been talking about doing this episode for a while, but I think it's providential that now here you are, because you are doing justice to these topics in a way that I couldn't. Right? In a way, you're explaining them in an academic way that would be difficult for me to articulate from my experience, which is more intuitive, experiential. But so I picked up this stuff and I kept it in a box tucked in my closet for a couple years, waiting to do this episode. So and I didn't look at it, I didn't open it, just so I could have it, because I thought the illustrations would be powerful. But there is something genuinely otherworldly about this.
Yep.
And all I'll say is that there are aspects of this where it's it couldn't have come together with the human mind. Non-human intelligence participated in it. Right. That's my only conclusion. I feel uncomfortable even saying that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking forward to burning this stuff when I'm done with it. And so the other thing I want to stress is not all Jews have even heard the word Kabbalah. It was not something that was part of my experience growing up. Maybe in the first 18 years of my life, I might have heard the word Talmud once. Right, the word Kabbalah, what's that? And so it's something that is out there. You can find it in the New Age world, and there have been lots of Jews that go through this spiritual but not religious world and end up hearing it. But there is a segment of the Jewish people, the ultra Orthodox, that are aware of Kabbalah. But if you were to just meet Mort at the deli, he probably doesn't know what Kabbalah is. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I love using that example because Jews are not monolithic. Yeah. And so when you think of a Harvey Weinstein, or you think of a Yuval Noah Harari, or you think of a Ben Shapiro, and these are not all the same thing, but just to say, and then you meet Mort at the deli, and it's is Mort at the deli talking about the Talmud, and is he studying
part of a conspiracy?
Part of a conspiracy. He's got his Kabbalistic rites in the back. No, he's just making you a corned beef sandwich, right? Yeah. But to understand that it is not monolithic, and not to take anything we're saying as applying to all Jews. Right. It's a field that applies to Jews broadly in the broadest sense, but not every specific Jew that you meet.
Yeah. I think it's healthy for a Christian to name something and call it what it is. In order to do that, you got to study things.
Yes.
Right? And I think the best point of view when studying things like this is when it's under the foot of Christ, right? Like in Colossians, it said he disarmed all rulers, principalities, powers, and put them to open shame through triumph over him. Yeah. And so as a Christian, when we're looking at something like this, not learning from it, but learning historically about it, you're naming it, you're calling it what it is, and you're putting it under the subjection of Christ. Yes. Right? And that's a beautiful thing to do because God told us to name things.
Right. Yes. I want to add one thing, to be very careful if for whatever reason you want to start learning it, from a sense of learning of it, not from it. What was it again?
Yeah, about it.
Learning about it. Yeah. To really genuinely be careful, because it's a little bit like handling radioactive waste. There are safe ways to handle radioactive waste, but you have to be trained in how to do that. You're not just going to go pick up a plutonium rod and be like, what's this? Like you have to be right.
The intro to The Simpsons.
Right. Like Homer.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so to take this stuff very seriously and not to approach it casually and make sure you take the proper precautions and perhaps read Brian's book or talk to Brian or various resources to know how to get into this. Don't just go diving in YOLO. I'm curious, because there are supernatural spiritual realities that, look, we're dealing with Satan.
Yeah.
And he knows you, and he knows the Bible. He knows many things better than any of us ever will. And to be careful with the seductive power of some of it, and to take it very seriously. Correct.
Satan is the ensemble behind Kabbalah.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
Be careful.
Yeah.
So I fell into learning about Kabbalah without planning to, without desiring to. Remember out on the streets of Brooklyn? I was tongue-tied. I had no idea what to say. I didn't even have categories. I was frustrated. Then I started a Doctor of Ministry degree program at Talbot School of Theology under J.P. Moreland and Gary DeWeese, who are two top-notch Christian apologists and philosophers, and they taught me for the first time the history of Western philosophy. And as I'm reading about Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus and all these guys, all of a sudden, all these synapses start firing, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what I was missing on the streets of Brooklyn. I didn't know philosophy. I didn't know the history of philosophy. And in my corner of the Messianic Jewish world, actually the whole Messianic Jewish world, we don't study philosophy. My evangelical subculture, we didn't study philosophy. So I was totally ill-equipped. And so I start reading philosophy in a Gentile mode with Gentile proponents, and then, oh my goodness, now I understand what those Hasids were saying out on the streets of Brooklyn. And so then that gets me long way around to answer your question from a long time ago of what are those parallels? And in my book on page 188 and 189, I have this huge table of like 25 different parallels between Kabbalistic doctrines and then Greek mystery religions, Greek mystery proponents that held to the same doctrine, but like 1,000 years before or more, okay? And so this stuff, it's not Jewish. It's not rabbinic. This stuff comes from way back. It comes from the Greeks. It comes from Pythagoras. It comes from Plotinus. It comes from the Gnostics. And this stuff has just been, it's just been repackaged as Judaism. And, you know, we would probably need to take an entire hour to go through this entire table. So I would encourage listeners to get the book and to look through these parallels. But the parallels are deep.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier Maimonides, right? And though we're not going to dive so much into that now, just to understand, just to help people understand just how important names like Maimonides and some of the rabbis in the Kabbalistic tradition, just how important these men are in shaping Jewish thought. Like, these are our teachers. These are the guys we listen to. We stay within the bounds that they define, and we don't deviate from it. And whatever it is that they say, whether it's contradicted by outside archaeological sources, doesn't matter. Maimonides said it. And so he's the guy. And so just the significant amount of influence that name has over Jewish thought that even I was aware of as a kid, but I was never exposed to his teachings directly as such. And the same is true in the Kabbalistic world and the mystical ultra-Orthodox world, just how important their sequence of rabbis are. This is the teaching that has been passed on, and these are the bounds that we operate within. And just to understand that they don't question outside sources. This is our thing for our people, and you can't understand it from the outside.
One of the lines that I have in my book, I think I repeat it 2 or 3 times, is that religious Jewish people are taught to be metaphysical disciples of Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, and Plotinus. And once they have mastered their discipleship under them, only then are they allowed to become disciples of Moses. Okay? Moses is last.
Whoa.
Okay?
Super
now,
backwards.
They don't say it that way, but their whole metaphysical reality, the way they interpret Scripture, is through the lenses of those men that they revere, but they don't know that they're revering them. It's because their sages are teaching the teachings of those guys. Maimonides was clear. He said when he was quoting Aristotle.
Yeah.
So Maimonides was good at footnoting his sources. But another one of my zingers in the book is that I say that Kabbalah is averse to the concept of a footnote. They do not cite their sources.
Yeah.
They do not claim where they got their ideas from. And so because of that, the regular Jewish person on the street, they don't know that they're metaphysical disciples of Plotinus and the Gnostics. They don't know that. Yeah. And so if I were to speak to them in this way, again, it would just go right past their head. But that's the secret truth that they don't know about. And if they were to study the history of Western mysticism and Western philosophy, they would see that Kabbalah takes the road less traveled in Western philosophy. Mm-hmm. You've got the majority that goes the direction of Aristotle. He's the father of science. You know, we love his categories and we love his scientific thought. That's the majority. But Kabbalah takes the road less traveled in Western philosophy, and they've made a whole system out of it.
No, this has been super, super insightful. Again, if you guys want to get the in-depth with these charts that you're mentioning, definitely check out your book. Again, we have it, Scandal of the Divine Messiah. We have it available in the footnotes. Definitely get it wherever books are sold. The last point, I'm just curious, maybe as we wrap up here, is salvation within the Kabbalistic worldview. Can you sum up, how does one go about that? Because I'm assuming it's probably similar to how one tries to do it in any aspect of the New Age through ascension, but how does it work within the worldview of Kabbalah?
Great question. And this is really important because it really encapsulates why Kabbalistic believing Jewish people don't think that they need Jesus. Okay? And it's not for the reasons that we evangelicals think that they don't need Jesus, like atonement and sin. No, that's not the reason why. So remember the whole system. Starts with Ein Sof. He is the infinity of infinities. He's pure unity. Pure unity. There's nothing else. And then he emanates lower realities that are still mystically united with him, but there's still some kind of multiplicity. Okay? They see increasing levels of multiplicity as increasing levels of evil. Singularity, simplicity, unity, that's pure. That's good. That's the best. Anything that is multiple is evil. Therefore, they want freedom from multiplicity. They want to shed their sense of identity. They want to shed their body, which is the definition of multiplicity. We have different parts to our bodies. They have different functions. That's all weighing us down. We need to ascend into the higher realm, which is increasing levels of simplicity, increasing levels of unity. And so you're this nice evangelical Christian, you love the Jewish people, you want to share the gospel with them, and you say, you know what? Jesus is the atonement for sin. You have sin, and Jesus is the one who can take your sin upon his shoulders, and then he died on the cross to free you from your sin, and then you can live in a new relationship with God, and you can be one with Christ, you can be in Christ, and all this kind of stuff, okay? They say, that's not good enough. Because does Christ free me from my self-perception? Does Christ free me from the multiplicity of my body? Does Christ free me from these distinctions in my mind that need to be transcended? Oh, he doesn't. Oh, that doesn't show up in the New Testament. Okay, then that means that Jesus is not the Savior that I want or need. I need something more than Jesus. And so even just sharing the gospel, they say, that's not good enough. And so some of the pre-evangelism that needs to be done before we can even share the gospel of atonement at the cross is to deal with this unity, diversity, unity worldview. That everything started in unity, it unraveled into diversity and multiplicity, and now we need to undo the process, undo the shattering, and go back up into unity. We got to deal with that, and you can't do that just from being a nice sola scriptura Christian, quoting verses to them. You got to go into philosophy. You got to go into the worldview. You got to go into the resources of the Christian theological and philosophical tradition, which is what my book does.
Can I jump off that for a second? Because this shows up just to help concretize it for people in an evangelistic sense. So this is an idea that I kick around with a lot of the New Age evangelism I do. The central question of all religion is, how are we reconciled to God? That is the central question. The Christian worldview is that we are separated from God by sin, and Christ pays the sin debt to bring us into reconciliation with God, shalom with God. That's the twoist worldview, the Christian worldview. The other worldview, which is oneism, we are reconciled to God by simply no longer existing as a separate self. Sin, virtue, all the stuff has to go away, and you are re-reconciled to God by the non-existence of you. And so all the practices you have to do are to unwind the knot of yourself so that you cease existing as a separate being and go into the uncreated light, etc. And you become all part of the all is one. And those are two very different conceptions of salvation. One is to redeem you as an immortal soul that will live forever as you are. The other is to eliminate or destroy you as you have ever known yourself in a very real and tangible sense. And there is no overlap here. You can maybe find some words that can attempt to bridge the gap, but you're thinking of two very different systems of how we're reconciled to God.
And just to wrap up here, if someone's listening in, say they come from a Jewish background, maybe they're into Kabbalah, they're practicing, and maybe they're thinking through some things you're talking about. How would you yourself articulate the gospel to them, or how would you articulate the truth to them?
Well, I would go directly to Isaiah 53, and I would explain how God has prophesied that, well, it doesn't say specifically in Isaiah 53 that he would come as a man, but that there would be a Redeemer who would come, and he would be pierced for our transgressions, he would be crushed for our iniquities, that the punishment that we deserve would be placed upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. And so Isaiah 53 talks about how this servant that God is going to send is going to bring shalom to Israel, is going to bring healing to Israel. He's going to bring reconciliation with God to Israel, and he's going to do so by taking our place. And so the gospel as preached in Isaiah 53 to Jewish people is that God has done that in the person of his Son, that he has taken our place. He lived a human life. He suffered like humans suffer. He experienced everything that we experience, yet without sin. And he died on that cross to take the sins of the world upon his shoulders, and that you as a Jewish person, by repenting of your sins and trusting that Yeshua, Jesus, is the appointed one from God, who is God in the flesh. He does have that mystical unity with God that is so big in Kabbalah. There is a mystical unity of Jesus' human nature and his divine nature. By confessing him as Lord, and you can be reconciled with God. You can have your sins be forgiven, and it is a new reality for you, a new life. You are born again with the Spirit. Moses said, I wish that all Israel had the Spirit upon them. The Torah does not provide that. Moses was asking for something that the Torah does not provide. But through Jesus, he reconciles our hearts so that the Holy Spirit that Moses wished would be on Israel can be on Israel. And that is a new life from the dead.
That's a perfect way to wrap it up.
Praise God.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys both for coming out here. This is part 2, talking about the Kabbalah. We're going to wrap up here. In the third part of our segment, when you listen in next week, we're going to be talking about how do we actually respond as Christians to the Kabbalah. This is going to be very apologetic in nature. So I'm very, very excited for that. So if you all have enjoyed this episode, definitely check it out. Again, check out Brian's book. The book is in our show notes, Scandal of the Divine Messiah. Both of you guys, thanks for coming out here. Definitely know some of you are enjoying the cooler weather, even though we're here in a garage. It's getting a little warm here. So we're going to crank up the swamp cooler, get a little cool again. We'll be back with part 3 in a little bit. And we'll talk to you all next time on Cultish, where we go into part 3 on the Kabbalah. Talk to you all soon.